Thank you, everyone, for hopping on for our October Aruba Go webinar. So as always, if you have any questions, please feel free, raise your hand, put any messages in the chat, and we'll be watching. For today, we have a couple great speakers, and we're going to do a demo, but I'm not going to steal their thunder. So I'm going to go ahead and give the floor over to Brandon.
Thanks, Connor. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're located. Thank you all for joining us for October session of this Aruba Go webinar series. Today, we're going to mainly focus on the HPE Aruba Data Center Networking portfolio. We're going to then switch gears, and I'm going to hand it over to Jon Busshart to do a Aruba Central demo, a little sneak peek of the new Central, and then we're going to close it off with Mike Herb doing a promotions and programs overview. So let me dive into the content. So my name is Brandon Atchley, and I'm the technical solutions engineer here at Ingram Micro, focused on all things HPE Aruba. So I'm more than happy to help you out with anything you may have from switches, wireless, SMB, SASE, you name it. Please get in touch with me, and I'm more than happy to jump on a call with yourself and your end user to discuss. Next, some additional Aruba resources that we have internally. So I introduced myself, but there's my email alias, so brandon.atchley@ingrammicro.com. And then Jon Busshart, who is presenting the Aruba Central overview. There is his contact information as well. He handles all of our demos for everything HPE. So if there is anything, not just with networking, but servers and storage, please feel free to reach out to Jon, leverage him. And he does a wonderful job at showing all things HPE. And he has a really interesting point of view since he controls and manages from end to end. And then in the middle there, we have two touch points with our teams. We have the HPE Aruba at ingrammicro.com alias, which handles all general sales, so quotes, orders, ETAs, tracking, things like that. And then we have our technical team, the solution design and services contact, where if you're looking for immediate support for building quotes out, getting technical validations, comparing from different vendors, that's the team that you can utilize to help with those. And with that, I will jump right into the content. So the first slide I want to kind of highlight is the Edge Services platform, the ESP of Aruba, right? So this is kind of the conglomerate of all of the different offerings that Aruba has today. This includes the data center networking that we're going to be talking about, really the entire switching portfolio, whether it's from the SMB all the way up to data center, our wireless, different segments as far as like security is concerned. Now, the reason I'm highlighting this is because they've built this platform for all the things to kind of work together in unison with each other. So now, that's not to say that you need anything else for these solutions to work. However, layering them on top of each other, you get like a lot nicer solution, right? A lot of them are designed to leverage other pieces and parts, so that it is really an entire ecosystem that we're looking at today. Now, as far as the data center is concerned, though, things that I want to highlight is the fact that the switching architect that we've designed, the CX platform, is a cloud-native architecture, and I'll get into more specifics in a later slide. However, to brief overview of it, it's how the operating system was designed in terms of modules, right? It understands that when you need to maybe push out an update, apply a firmware change or a routing table change. In legacy architectures, you could potentially bring down the entire network by having to push out those and may potentially have the switch reboot. With the cloud native architecture, things were built in more containerized. Another kind of selling point or benefit of the data center portfolio within Aruba that we're going to highlight today is the AMD Pensando integration, or the a partnership that we have with our data processing data center switches, the CX10K. And these are really the first of its kind, where we're essentially putting security services and additional services on top of the switching, so that way we don't have to leverage other third party or additional solutions when we're talking about handling our data center workloads. And then we wrap all of that together nice with a software-defined layer with certain platforms we can leverage, whether it's Aruba Central for our cloud management platform, or we're doing something like the Aruba Fabric Composer, which allows us to do really complex layer 3 or more security-intensive policies. It's going to help us deploy and manage those at ease. And with this architecture, we're helping you lower your overall total cost of ownership. And we'll get into a little bit of that. And it's essentially going to be a faster time to deployment, because we're doing software defined to push out some of the policies and add on new parts of the network. Now, to get a little bit of look at the CX of kind of the awards or where we operate, right now we're number 2 market share with over 1 billion ports shipped. That goes all the way from the campus to the data center, but that is a huge achievement. I feel, with being one of the most utilized platforms just in the industry is just a huge benefit. We have been 18 years running one of the Gartner Magic Quadrant leaders within the wired and wireless space. So that's just shows the kind of time and tenure that we have within this field, along with we're on our 7th generation of our ASICs. And what that really kind of highlights and what I want to show is we have a long tenure of developing things in-house, right? It's not just the code that we're pushing out. The ASICs that we're utilizing in our switches are also things that we're developing, right? And if anybody has history with HPE and their networking portfolio going back to the ProCurve days, these ASICs are the same ASIC foundations that we're utilizing for the ProCurve, right? So that has a lot of history within ProCurve. When Aruba came into the family, we continued to develop those ASICs and build on top of that portfolio and merge some of the Aruba components onto it just to make it an overall stronger and better platform. So it's over 1,000 patents of within the networking space, which is just a huge kind of testament of what we offer. Now here's a look at the entire CX switching portfolio. I'm not really going to dwell on all of these or go into model specific. I just wanted to kind of highlight the entire portfolio because it is a pretty massive portfolio with a lot of different switch offerings. Now the reason I highlight this is because within the CX portfolio, it is a common operating system. We didn't design this to have maybe a one operating system for the campus switches and a secondary operating system for the data center or the core switches. This is a simplified OS across the from end to end, really highlighting the fact that when your engineers or your technical team has to go out and learn this and be familiar with this to deploy it, whether you're starting with something as basic as a CX1000, which is a basic layer 2 switch for the edge, all the way up to our data center switches, they're going to be very familiar with how to deploy and all the different components in there because they're not switching different operating systems or different models. It's common throughout the entire platform. And then just highlighting the data center portfolio or what we can position within the data center space. It's really looking at the 6300M and above. 6300M, we're really looking at more of the out-of-band management switches to handle kind of that set of traffic. However, for the core data center, we're looking at the 8000, the 9000s, and the 10000 series. The 8000 is really the entry level switches that are going to be handling like the 10 gig and above, 1025. When we look at the 9000, that's where we're looking at really the 100 gig, 200 gig, 400 gig switches. And then when we look at the CX10K, that's when we get into that unique switch with the DPUs and handling the security services on top of them. But there's a lot of different models and features within these series to handle all the different types of workloads. So we're not just like a one-trick pony where we have one or two switches to handle a generic sense of data. We have a lot of different models to be flexible in the needs. Very busy overview chart of the data center portfolio. I'm not going to go through and pick this out. I just want you to kind of see the different features and benefits that we offer as far as like maybe deep packets or deep buffers for storage networking, some of the resilient capabilities as we have for redundancy, hot swappable capability, stacking, high availability. And this slide deck is going to get shared. So I wanted to make sure this was included. So that way, if there was anything that you need to look at and say, hey, does this switch offer these features, these benefits, this was included within that content. Now this, however, this is coming back to earlier when I wanted to mention that I was going to focus on the cloud native design, and this is what I meant when I was coming back to it. So this slide kind of captures how the architecture was built and designed, right, where there's microservices and each of the different components within our operating system are contained within their own modules, right, whether it's the network's analytics, the database running on them, or maybe the layer 3 routing capabilities, right, they're self-contained. So if anything happens or changes, or let's say maybe you pushed out something that crashes that specific module, right, it's not going to crash the entire switch, it's not going to wreak havoc on the network, it's just going to momentarily bring down that module and wait for that module to restart. So you don't have a big outage because of something that happened within the switch, or maybe even just a simple update, right? So it makes it a lot easier to deploy and grow and utilize the platform because you're kind of safeguarded from messing anything up. And then we build programmability on top of it. So we have the REST APIs and we have Python scripting that you can do on top of it. So it really unlocks more potential and performance onto it because you can kind of utilize the platform to your needs. And there is a ecosystem out there that you can tap into to kind of get different components that you can leverage to utilize this platform and get more benefits out of it. Now, a little bit of look of how we're doing the high availability. So within our data center portfolio, we leverage something called VSX, which is a little bit different than common stacking capabilities. So if you're familiar with typical architectures that you 2 or 3 switches together and you connect them and they become a stack, right? One logical unit. The VSX is operating a little bit differently. It's not putting the units together and publishing it as one logical unit. It's really for high availability. And this is kind of highlighting the data center use case, right? In the data center environments, we're not looking to stack a bunch of switches together and have it look and feel as one. We're really designing it so that way it's resilient, right? If one of the switches fails, we need to make sure that there's a redundant path and redundant connection that it can utilize. And with a stacking architecture, sometimes it can become a little bit cumbersome. One of the units fails and now the stack has to kind of readjust, and it's not necessarily the most optimized for a data center environment. So this is really a more optimized take on it, where each switch is their individual entity, but they're sharing data and they're sharing certain components across as far as like configuration syncs. So that way, if anything happens to one switch or the other, even if simply you have to push out an update that will restart the switch, they're going to be working in unison to each other. So that way, the switch that's going to be, taken offline for a moment, it'll actually pass all of its traffic over, preemptively, so that way none of the servers or networking components that are on are going to actually experience an outage. The coolest thing I have to share on this was when Aruba first basically showed this at Atmosphere. They did it live on stage with the network that was running the Atmosphere event, right? So all the data that Atmosphere was going through a pair of data center switches, and they pushed out an upgrade live to the switch, and they showed on the screen the one switch, pushing the workload over to the secondary switch, the switch going offline, coming back online, and then it basically pushing back and kind of readjusting the traffic between the two switches. And it was just a kind of a really cool thing to see in a real world environment. And it was just a kind of a huge selling point, in my opinion, of this in data center environments. Now, to look at the evolution of the architectures of the data center, or just in kind of switching in general, right? If we go back to like the 90s, it was generation one, where it was maybe more of a flat network. We had basic protocols, maybe a spanning tree. It was kind of evolving at that point, but we didn't really have any heavy data intensive applications that were utilized at this time. Fast forward to 2000s, where we started getting into the more layer 3 capabilities, and we had more of a core, a distribution, an access layer, and most of it was like north and south traffic. Now we get into the kind of the more modern era, where we're talking about the third generation, and these are leveraging VXLAN. We would have a lot more east and west traffic. We would potentially put a firewall in the mix to handle the security. So we would hairpin the traffic to a firewall to make sure we're locking down all that data. Maybe we'd put taps into the mix. And now we're looking at this fourth generation with our CX10K, where we're actually putting all of those services right on the top of rack switch. So that way we no longer have to have the taps in the mix, or we don't have to hairpin the traffic to the firewall. We don't have to layer additional services or agents on top of our network, our servers to handle that. The firewall can handle, or the top of rack switch, the CX10K can handle all of these services. So you don't have to add all those extra traffic to the network. And to give you an example of what I mean by this, if we look at the third generation and the additional services or the additional firewalls, we would have our different racks, right? We'd have A, B, C, and D with our leaf switches, the top of rack switches. They would connect up to our spine switches. And anytime the data was needing to be touched by the different services or firewall in the network, it would have to go to that rack E, have those services applied, have those security policies applied, and then come back down into the network. And that added a lot of additional traffic on top of the network, which congested the links. And essentially, to fix this, you were either adding more switches to it or more firewalls, and it just became this really messy architecture. With the CX10K switches, we're handling that security right at the top of rack. So anything internally is just being dealt with within that rack or within the rack next door. We're not adding all of that additional traffic to exit the rack it's in to talk to its neighbor and go to E to get those permissions. We're handling everything right at top of rack, and it's really bringing down that overall latency and the cost, because we're now not having two size out firewalls as large to handle this enormous amount of traffic that we're handling just to talk to neighboring servers or storage devices. Now, how is this all kind of operating and being dealt with and being controlled? Fabric Composer is one of the kind of main tools that we're leveraging for this architecture. And the Fabric Composer has a targeted use case more in the data center environment. And this is where I mentioned we have Aruba Central and we have a Fabric Composer. And you might ask, okay, well, what's the difference, or where do we use one over the other? Fabric Composer really shines data center wise. Aruba Central is going to be more of a overall network, edge switches, campus switches, multiple branch locations. When we're really highlighting a data center deployment and we're looking at handling a lot of those heavier routing protocols, or we have maybe partner vendors in there like VMware that we're potentially wanting to integrate into, Fabric Composer is really the kind of the go-to platform that's going to help you with that. It can integrate with VMware and understand, and let's take a look at the next slide, understand how that virtual environment is built out. So if you're spinning up new workloads within your virtual infrastructure, the Fabric Composer is going to be able to see those new workloads spin up, and it's going to tripping over my words there, automatically be able to push out to the network the new changes that need to be implemented to understand those new workloads that potentially are going to be transacting through the switches, right? The Fabric Composer is a GUI, so as far as pushing out, you don't have to memorize a whole string of CLI commands to leverage different things like OSPF or BGP or VXLAN. You have kind of easy templates that you can work within, and it's going to be able to group all of the different switches, leaf and spine, different architectures, so that way you can deploy multiple different instances of the data center networking, so you can kind of holistically view end-to-end all of your data center networking. Now, to close it off, we have a few more slides. I just wanted to highlight the different use cases for each, right? These are not set in stone. They're very flexible, but whether you're doing things like a virtual environment, you're doing Red Hat Linux core enterprise workloads, right? We have the 8360 and 8325 that have a very flexible offering, 1025 gig there, even up to 50 gig. Storage optimized is really going to highlight the 8325 with it being a go-to target when we're talking about Electra, a DHCI type of deployment. We have validated designs and use cases, for all of those. We have the CX10K, the distributed services switch, that has a kind of a unique offering, like I mentioned, with the security, but it helps you maintain compliance with a PCI or HIPAA because of how it can segment the traffic or layer additional encryption on top of it. And then the 9300, which is our high performance. We have a new model out that I showed in the previous model overview that actually is optimized for AI workloads, handling different capabilities or MACsec on the ports to make sure you're encrypted, or the IPsec tunnels, just to give you that additional capabilities. And then, because Aruba is a little bit newer to being a data center networking vendor, they've put a lot of time and effort into making sure they have validated reference designs for different deployments. So if you're deploying a large, like let's say SAP, deployment, and you want to know, exact settings that you need or validated reference, so you can kind of go off of Aruba, and HPE has spent the time to deploy these, write down the configurations, show you everything, so that way you know that, hey, it can work, this is how it worked, and this is how we did it, just to get that peace of mind before you are leveraging the Aruba platform to deploy that type of solution. And then going back to one slide, I skipped over this one, I apologize. This was the CX10K overview slide that I did want to make sure I highlight, just to show you the services and capabilities that we have within that platform. We have the firewall, the DDoS, the telemetry, encryption, even things like NAT and server load balancing built right onto those. And the real big performance, or the capabilities of this, is that we have two DPU modules that are built on that each can handle 400 gigs of throughput, giving this switch a combined aggregate throughput of 800 gigs. So that way you can ensure that you're not going to be bottlenecking any of your performance. And then at the end of the day, the networking component of Aruba is just a piece of an overall larger puzzle of HPE in general, with the servers and storage, and everything is better together. We have integrations and validation reference, whether you're using one solution or another. We have a lot of the documentation to kind of leverage to show that. And with that, I will turn it over to Jon for the Aruba Central overview. I appreciate you all listening to the data center section, and if there's any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat.
All right, I'm going to grab the screen, Brandon.
Yep, go for it.
There we go. All right, you guys can see my desktop, correct?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to do a demonstration on Aruba Central for you, but just to give you a little bit more of a background of who I am and what I do. I work out of Ingram Micro's Business Transformation Center. A lot of people say that we are a demonstration or a proof of concept facility. I'll actually say that we are so much more than that. Basically, I have equipment, and however you can leverage that equipment to be successful with your opportunities, you're more than welcome to that. And it can be to your internal staff, it can be to your end users, whatever helps you guys be successful with your opportunities. And it certainly can be the kind of point and click demonstration that I'm going to show you right now, but it can be so much more. I've had people leverage me in all kinds of crazy ways. All right, so I'm going to start at this level before I dig into Aruba Central. Obviously, everything is GreenLake these days with HPE. And I know a lot of people know of GreenLake as kind of being the consumption model, or pay for what you utilize on a monthly basis, a very cloud-like approach to paying for services. So you get hardware on site, and then you pay for HP based on utilization of the environment. The equipment's owned by HPE, but that's one aspect of really what GreenLake is. If you look at the cloud as being more of an experience and less of a destination, HPE GreenLake brings that experience to on-prem hardware. That can certainly be the cost model that I was talking about, but it can also be the day-to-day maintenance as well. And that's what we're looking at here. I'm logged into the GreenLake platform. And one of the benefits of this platform is the end-to-end management you can do. So for example, let's say I'm going to set somebody up a new virtualized environment. Could I go into Aruba Central and configure their networking? Certainly could. Switches, client access, things like that. Could I then go into Compute Ops and install something like an ESX server in an environment, update, configure the rate set, things like that? Yep. And then could I carve out storage and present it to that VMware environment? Absolutely, I could in this environment. All while looking at cost, right, and power utilization, as well as getting AI analytics. Right. So HPE is the only vendor that I know that can manage this type of stack, a cross stack in this fashion. Now, our discussion is going to be with Aruba Central, in particular into the data center switches. So I'm going to launch into that real quick. And this is Aruba Central. Now, what I will say is this entire GreenLake platform was built off the foundations of Aruba Central. All right, so way back when HPE acquired Aruba, right, the Aruba Central is up, rocking and rolling, and they just took the underpinnings of that and they expanded it out to be able to do this entire GreenLake management concept. Now, what I'm going to show you, we're going to go into a little bit of a new Aruba Central, but I want to get your guys' heads wrapped around Aruba Central proper, we'll say. What I am looking at is from a global perspective. It'll be very important when you manage this environment to understand up what's in this corner here, because depending on what's up in this corner, you're going to get a different list down here of entities, and based on what I have selected down here, these tabs across the top will change. All right, so what can this be? This can be groups, which is a reporting context, but also it can be a configuration context as well. So I group together like devices that I want to have the same configuration. Sites are just as it sounds. They're sites all across the globe. And labels, that's however you want to organize your equipment within your environment. Right? You can create a label and organize that together. Right. Now, it's not only group sites and labels. It can also be individual devices. It can also be clients in a network. And to give you kind of a little perspective on that real quick, if I go over to this site, this is Ingram Micro Williamsville, I can select the floor plan. I know this is kind of a wireless perspective, but I could dig into this and I can see the access points within the environment. But you can see over here, it says Ingram Micro's Williamsville. That is actually the group name or the site because I selected that. Right, and obviously these change. My tabs go across change, get things like topology. Right, so I can see how things are interconnected, and I'm rewiring things all the time. But I know how some things are interconnected within my environment. Right, I'll go back up to global. Right, there are other things that I can have. Obviously, a lot of this has to do with connectivity, but even I have the ability to go into clients themselves if I want to. So, for example, let's see if we can find a client down here. Let's do summary. I'm going to grab this client here. I can dig into him. Now, this is coming to the latest version of CX switches as well, to where I can go in and get detailed type of information, especially with the applications I'm going to show you. But even with this, I can tell where this client is connected to, the SSID, the access point, and even the switch, and that would be the port on the switch as well. If I go down one level, I can see the applications that this person is utilizing. I'll let this up, and I can see maybe I'm concerned with Facebook here. Why are they using Facebook during business hours? I might want to do a little research on that. If you can see up here, then I have the clients selected up here. And if I go back, it brings me back into global, but I'm under clients, and these would be all the clients. But I still have the application piece over here. So if I want to see how all the clients out there are maybe utilizing Facebook, I could go down to this section and grab that. And maybe I might want to expand this out to about a week. Maybe we'll get some more information here. All right, and then I could search. Oops. Search Facebook. If I could type incorrectly, let's try that one more time. And then again, I could expand that out, and I'll see how the resources are being utilized on my network. All right. If I go down a little bit further, we could do firmware upgrades in this environment. So I could do access points switches is what we're interested in today. So I've got a Aruba CX switch up here, as well as the older AOS switches. So if you've been around for a long time working with HP, these would be the ProCurve switches or the ProVision switches. Obviously, when HP acquired Aruba, they renamed those to AOS switches. And in this context, they're calling them AOS-S switches. But I could upgrade these if I wanted to. I could set compliance over here. Right? And again, I could choose my firmware for the CX-based switches as well as the AOS-based switches if I wanted to. Right? And I could choose when I might want to do those upgrades, when I have those upgrades happen. I could upgrade all devices if I felt like through kind of the same context, or if I wanted to, I could update individual firmware. And it looks like I've got some newer firmware that I could push out. Won't do it right now while we're demoing, but just something to be aware of. I could create reports inside this environment, so reports on different criteria. I like to go into the create section because you can see what some of these reports are. Because if I highlight something like switch capacity planning and I click preview, I can get an example of the report. So the report can be sent out as PDF. It can be sent out as an Excel sheet, a CVS if you wanted to. It could be emailed as well. All right, but I got different types of reports. PCI compliance, right? We were looking at applications. That would be AppRF. We could take a look at that as well. See what applications people are using. I get that all from within this context. So I could go into alerts and events and get alerts on things that are happening within my environment. I don't have anything right now, but if I wanted to configure this, I always look for the little gear up in this corner. There's something I can configure. If I click configure, we can see the different types of configurations that I can do, or alerts I can get. Right, and if I go over to switch, these are the type of alerts I can get from the switch. Right, for example, switch port transmission rate. But each one of these are just a little bit different, giving you different options based on based on the category you're selecting. Right. We also have certain tools on this environment. So, for example, if I wanted to get to a console on the switch, right, because obviously the config file is going to be the source of all truth in the end. So if I did switch here, I could select my switch type. We'll do a CX switch and I'll log into it. So I'll put the username. I'll put my password in. Now, because it's connected with Aruba Central, these will only be basically show commands, but I could certainly get a show of a running configuration if I felt like it. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the configuration of these switches. That will be done, um, you know, under devices. So what I'm going to do, the groups are actually the configuration context. So I'll start up here at this Business Transformation Center. I'm going to select devices down here, and I'm going to look at switches. Right, and I just have one lonely switch in this category. It happens to be an AOS switch. But if I go over here, you can see the two different configuration contexts. I think it's important to know that the switches that your customer may have had for years could be brought up underneath Aruba Central. So certainly AOS or Pro Curve type style switches could be brought under Aruba Central for management. Their management context looks like this. So for example, if I go under, let's say interfaces, all right, we can see the ports on the interfaces. I could go to VLANs over here and see what VLANs are configured. Right, so I don't have a lot of VLANs configured in this context. I just have this 86 VLAN configured so it can talk up with the cloud. Right, but if I go in and actually select the switch, so this will get pushed out to all switches within this group. So if I had multiple switches in here, they'd all get this configuration. But if I go look at the list, right, and I select this switch, and notice this context over here changes to that switch. Right, I can go back down to devices, and then it will go to the same location. So interfaces and VLANs, right? You can see I have a lot more VLANs that are pushed down, right? So again, the idea is you configure, what's the same in a group, but you can go down to individual switches and configure the differences if you wanted to. Now, if I go back one, and again, we're in devices, you could see that this was the configuration context for the AOS-S switches. Now, I think they've improved this context if you look at the configuration for the AOS CX-based switches, so it's a little bit more simplified inside the environment. As a matter of fact, I have one of those switches configured over here under BTC switches. Right. And I can go in here and maybe I want to look at VLANs. Right. Maybe I want to add another VLAN. Maybe I want to do 182. We'll give it a name. We can add that. All right, now that'll show up down here. Again, any switch that's a part of this configuration would get that configuration. So if I go back, we can do ports and link aggregation. So for example, maybe I went down to, we went down to 19 here. Maybe I want to edit this guy and I want to turn this guy into an access port. It could certainly be a trunk port. And maybe I want to give it 182 as its VLAN. You could save that. All right, if I wanted to do maybe a link aggregation, I could certainly do that. So we'll do, let's say lag 123. We'll select some port members for this. So maybe I'll do 17, and 18. All right. and I'll do LACP active, and I'll make this a trunk. All right, and then we click add. All right, so it just gives you some basic things that you can do within the switch. One of the nice things I do like about this configuration context, if I go back here, obviously there's a bunch of things that I can configure within here, but some people just like to see a command line sometimes, good old-fashioned scroll run, config T type of things. Right over here with multi-edit, I can enable that, and this will actually bring some of that to you. So I only have one switch in here, but I could select multiple switches if I wanted to. Again, the idea is you configure it mass, right, and change individually. But if I go over here, I could edit this configuration if I wanted to. Now you can see this is the config file, and there's my VLAN 182 that I just added. But if I wanted to change this, I could quite literally go in here and change that to 183, right? Oops, go back one. Right, and I could save this, and I can make those changes. So I could configure a whole, config file through just a command line style interface. Right? And I think that's a nice benefit. Use the GUI for things that are easy in the GUI, and use the command line for things that are easy in the command line. All right, so that's just kind of a quick overview of where we sit today with managing HP switches. If you want to go in deeper with me, certainly I would suggest reaching out to me. But I want to spend the rest of our time talking about this little switch over here. So one thing I'd like to point out, and I'm going to go back up to the GreenLake platform, is the GreenLake platform has a certain look and feel on it. So for example, if I go into Compute Ops Management, you'll see we have a certain look and feel that's a part of this, right? And I'm not going to dig into that too deeply. And just to kind of hit that point home, right? Maybe I'll go into the Sustainability Insight Center, right? This will tell me how my power is being utilized in my environment, right? And again, this has kind of a similar look and feel. Not that Aruba Central is too different, right? But it has a slightly different look and feel. Now, a lot of people love how Aruba Central is today, and they've been using it for years and years. I mean, this interface hasn't changed that much since when I first started working with it many years ago when HP acquired it. Right, but they're looking to do something new, give it the interface a new kind of uplift, as well as add some new additional features, and that's what's going to happen in new Aruba Central. So I'm going to enable that so we can look at that, and you can see it has the little more newer look and feel into the environment. And actually going to select our Ingram Micro Williamsville site over here, right, and we can get all kinds of metrics as to what's going on inside my environment right now. Right, if I click over here, you can see we have the sun as well as this moon perspective into our environment. I can select each one of these pieces and look at that. I get different information, look at the clients that are in this environment. But one of the most important things I think about this interface is what I like to call is the time machine back here. So have you ever run into that situation where somebody said, something was wonky with the network, last week at 3 o'clock, but it seems to be working fine. I don't know what was going on back then. That's almost like the auto mechanic. Like you hear a knocking in the back of your car, you don't know what's going on. You bring it to the auto mechanic, and it's not knocking in the back of your car anymore. And you're like, Mr. Auto Mechanic, I swear something was going on. Don't you wish you could have rolled back in time and had that mechanic sit in your car while that clunking was kind of happening? Well, up here allows us to be able to do that. So if somebody said something was going on the network, a while back, and you wanted to see kind of what was happening, you could roll back in time. So for example, it will go back maybe 7 days, and we could see issues that were popping up here, warnings that are popping down here. For example, I'll grab this green area just so you could see, and you can see this is a healthy point in time. It looks like everything is good, right? But I could dig into other places. So for example, maybe right here, right? And again, we can get down to the minute. I can see what's happening. You can see 2 devices are offline. Oh, that's the reason why that resource disappeared. You were complaining to me about it was something that was wrong with the networking when it actually was a couple devices were offline. So we have the ability to kind of roll back and see that within the environment. And again, we get that feature through the timeline. Again, that's with the new Aruba interface. Now, what I will say is this interface is a reporting type of interface today. There will come configuration options that happen in here, but they're really working on giving you a new way to look at this environment. So for example, I can look over here at a map, and we can actually look at a satellite. And if you've never been to Ingram Micro, this is actually a picture of Ingram Micro from the roof, right? But we could also look at the topology. So they're trying to do something interesting with the topology as well. So Ingram Micro, what's interconnected with these different devices in here, right? And I could click on individual devices and change my focus if I wanted to. Right, and I could see what's connected to this as well as my path out to the internet in this case. Right, so different ways to be able to view what's going on within a network. Now, what I will say is this is definitely different for people, and people are comfortable with the way Aruba Central is. They're not taking that away. They're just trying to give people a taste of what's coming as they introduce new features within this environment. So your customer can certainly go back and switch back to the normal Aruba environment. All right. All right, so I think I'll stop here and pass it back to Brandon. If you guys want to learn a little bit more about any of these technologies, you want to go into a little bit deeper on a new Aruba Central, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than willing to help anybody out there.
And it's actually going over to Mike. So Mike, if you kick it off.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Connor. I just have a couple of brief comments to make about a demo opportunity and some promos and some programs that are related to the CX switch line, which Brandon was talking about earlier. We have, as you can see on the slide, an Ingram Micro exclusive demo opportunities of the CX10,000 series Pensando switches. We have 2 of these in our Business Transformation Center. And you can see we've got a little bit of a description about some of the benefits of this particular switch. It cuts down east-west traffic behind the firewall. It allows network traffic to flow more freely. And all of this is done at 1/3 the total cost of ownership of comparable solutions. If you would like to demo this, and we highly recommend that you do, if you're working in a data center situation and you want to try a new solution, just contact me, michael.herb@ingrammicro.com, and we can do the rest. Now, you don't have to write this down right now. I'm going to follow up after this presentation is over with some email information about this demo opportunity and about the programs and the promos associated with the CX 10,000 series switch line, or with the CX switch line, and some other information that I'll talk about. But I just wanted to make you aware of it now. And like I said, I will send it to you when we're done. Okay. Another thing I wanted to mention. Okay, as far as promos and programs. We have an HPE Aruba DCN special here. Customers who purchase the CX8325, the 8360, the 9300, or the 10,000 series, which I just spoke about and is the one we have the demo opportunity with, if it is replacing Cisco, you can get up to a $5,000 credit per eligible switch. All right, that's a pretty significant amount and a great opportunity. In addition, this promo provides a $1,000 credit for each 100 gig or 400 gig Aruba transceiver. So you can get a lot of money back on opportunities where you're replacing Cisco with CX switches and also with Aruba transceivers. Also a little note there that you can self-decommission the Cisco switches, or you can use HPE asset upcycling in order to be able to do that. All right. One last thing I want to bring to your attention before I turn it back to Connor is that purchasing switches in the CX series enables you to be able to accumulate spiffs in the Engage and Grow program. For the CX8100, you get a $75 per unit spiff. For the 8325 and the 8360, $100 per unit. The 8400, $100 to $150 per unit. 9300, 200, and the CX10,000 series, which once again I mentioned is the unit we want to get people to demo, $500 per unit. Okay, that's all I have to say. We got demos, we got sort of a rip and replace with Cisco, and we've got spiffs for you in the DCN product line. So please keep that in mind. And once again, I will send this information to you after we're done here. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop the share and turn it back to Connor. Go ahead, Connor.
All right. Awesome. Thank you very much, Mike. And thank you, Brandon and John, for everyone's part in this. So that is all that we had scheduled for you today. Just want to say thank you to everybody for attending the webinar this month. We greatly appreciate it. And yeah, we'll be following up with all of the information that we went over on the call today. And if you have any further questions, we'll make sure all of our contact information is on there. And again, we're here. We're happy to help. So just want to say thank you again to everybody, and let us know if you have any questions.